Hey there, how's it going? Let's try something a bit different this week. While I love making games, I'm in between a few projects at the moment, and I've been getting into some other hobbies that I really enjoy and thought would be fun to share. I'm a sucker for a good card game. I played and was a judge in the early days of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game, and I played Magic the Gathering for years and years. I even worked in a trading card store for a summer in college where I played a variety of games. This was around 2004, which was the heyday of collectible card games. So suffice it to say, I have a lot of cards that I collected over the years. Before I get comments saying that that's not many and you have more than I do, good for you. I was never a collector. I was a player that usually traded or sold cards to get the ones that I want. These stacks are mostly common and uncommon cards that really aren't worth much. Sadly, I really haven't kept up with the games anymore. The playgroup I had disbanded years ago due to people moving away, and I haven't really done much with any of the cards since then. For a few years now, I've been seeing people make 3D cards by cutting up multiple copies and stacking them together. One night I decided to give it a go and I made this, which isn't great, but it's still pretty cool. And I've been hooked ever since. And over the last 6 to 7 months, I've continued making them. Each time learning a bit more and trying new techniques. I think I have a pretty good grasp on a lot of it now, and I wanted to share what it takes to make one. So if you have a bunch of old cards laying around, it may be something you're interested in. Or if you just want to see the process of making a fun art piece, let's go. Also, I will say that if you're someone who doesn't like seeing these cards destroyed, it's probably best to look away now. They're mine, and I'm not really doing this with anything expensive yet. But for me, this is a better use than them just sitting in a box for many more years to come. Also, it's a mass-produced product. It'll be okay. Maybe I'll cut up this one later. So some of the clips I've been showing here are from a Spoink Pokémon card that I made recently. But I'm still new to filming my process when I'm doing something that's not on a computer screen. So there's a lot of it that's missing or shot badly. However, I really like the way it turned out, so let's try the same approach with this Oddish card. Its art is pretty simple and we can focus on making the character pop. So first things first, cutting. Lots and lots of cutting. I find it rather meditative. I just put on something to watch or listen to and just cut. After a lot of trial and error, I found you don't want to just stick the blade in and pull, unless it's with a ruler. For more complicated areas, you want to do short plunging cuts, almost like you're sawing. I know it seems simple, but trading cards are pretty thick and don't cut like plain paper. You can see the layers pretty well here. I cut one card, leaving the leaves attached, and then from another card, I cut out pieces of leaves that I'll be placing on top later to create some depth. And I do the same thing with the Oddish, cutting out pieces I need to stack together. Here you can see how I broke this out and all the elements to create the 3D effect. With everything all cut out, it's time for the most tedious part of the process. Although it is something I found that really bumps up the quality of the final product. Burnishing the edges. Cutting the cards causes the edges of the layers to separate a little bit and lift up in some places. I take round sculpting tools and burnish the edges on a spare piece of ceramic tile. Having a hard surface here is better than a soft one like a cutting mat because the pressure is put on the edge of the card and not absorbed by the working surface. Now I need to add dimension to the pieces of Oddish, and I do want a soft surface for that, so I use this cheap leather coaster and a larger sculpting tool to mold the flat cardstock into a more round and realistic shape. Once all this is done, we need to deal with the cut edges. It's not as noticeable on camera, but in person, the white edges really stick out. You can really see it in this card I made a while ago. It just doesn't blend in well with the darker areas behind it. So we need to paint them. Nothing fancy here, just the cheapest acrylic paint I have. I use it straight from the cap here because we don't need much. Quick note, I've tried things like Sharpies in this area, but the ink can end up bleeding into the edges of the image, so I don't do that anymore. And also, if you slip and hit the card face, it can be a real problem. A good and bad thing is that the card faces have a finish on them that the paint has trouble sticking to, which means I can be a little sloppy with the way I do this and then just wipe away the excess. Next, we need to paint on the front of the card to hide elements that will be covered. And since the paint doesn't stick well, this can be a bit of a pain. I found the best strategy is not to overbrush the areas, add paint in a few strokes, wait for it to dry, and then do it again. Usually it takes 2 to 3 coats to get rid of the streaky look. It is nice though that if you mess up, it's usually pretty easy to just scrape it off and try again. With everything painted, let's assemble our Oddish. I'm using gel superglue here, but you can use whatever adhesive you want. I just like this kind and I use it. To lift the body off the leaves, I first tried using a piece of foam tape, but it just didn't work the way I wanted to and I couldn't get it placed right. So I pulled it off along with the center leaf and had to build up some risers with squares cut out of a spare card. Then of course, I placed the body slightly off center and had to rip it off and do it again. Finally, I place it right, and then we just need to add the feet and our oddish is done. Look how cute it is. I did do some off-camera embossing that's not as visible as I'd like. I'm still practicing that skill, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here. Just so you know, I take a small fine point sculpting tool and just trace the edges of the lines I'd like to have an emboss effect. I wanted to test out some new techniques with this card, so I started cutting out the non-yellow parts of the card so I could layer them up on top later. Cutting out these tiny graphic elements can be really tough, and it takes a good amount of practice. As you can see, they're barely the size of my fingernail, and you gotta be careful. The circles and curves can be really challenging. I'm still not perfect at it, but I'm definitely getting better than I used to be. Before moving into the final stage, I do a quick dry mock-up like I did with the oddish. Then it's the same process as before. You can really see the effect of the burnishing on the long straight edges here. I also paint out the areas that will be under the other layers as well as the inside of the frame. This will help by making it all look like a shadow instead of seeing the image twice when you're looking at it from an angle. Normally I paint the whole outside of the card, but I wanted to see what it would look like if you left some of the edges yellow on this one. And finally, this series of Pokemon card has a strange edge on it that looks kind of like a scan code or something. And some of the other cards don't have that, they just have this nice line design. So I sacrificed this Psychic Pokemon card to use in place of the basic one I had. Then we assemble like before, gluing the layers together. I screwed up a little bit here on the basic Pokemon pop-out by scratching it with my tweezers. These precision tweezers are great, but can also be really difficult and sharp, so they can scratch stuff, so you gotta be extra careful. I'm still getting practice with them. Knowing anything I would do to try to fix it would most likely just cause more damage, I just placed it in the correct spot and let it be. Next, we stack the leaf to give some good depth. I'm not perfectly following the base image, but I found placing the leaves in different ways made it look a little bit better and made it stand out a little more. I used this 3M black foam tape to connect the cards, and let me tell you, this stuff is sticky. It comes in a roll and gets stuck to everything when you try to use it. So I found that by using some wax paper, I can make a temporary back, which allows me to cut more precision strips that I can use later. But the adhesive is so strong, so I can't pre-make a lot of this because the wax paper will eventually get good and stuck to it and then not come off properly. So I just try to lay out and cut out what I'm gonna need. Eventually, I do want to make a jig to put the cards together properly and help align them better, but I'm still just using the table and my fingers to align the cards. I actually get pretty good results, but it could be better. I wanted the oddish to look like it was popping out, so I built up several layers of double-sided foam tape and stuck it in. I ended up placing the oddish a bit low. Luckily, the foam tape is pretty malleable in this state, especially when it's stacked. But while moving it, I of course knocked off one of the leaves and then had to do some emergency reattachment surgery while the card was in place. Finally, another first with this card. I got some UV resin because I've seen other creators use it and it seems like a cool effect. I added blobs to the energy symbols and oddish's eyes to make them pop out of the card a little bit more. Then just hit them with the UV light and waited. Then after a quick cleanup, here's the final result. I finally feel like I know what I'm doing when making these cards. Now I just need to keep practicing to execute them even better. My next task is to take this crazy detailed card and I'm going to be embedding this life counter to make it even cooler. If you enjoy this project and want to see the next, let me know in the comments and leave a like. And if you feel so inclined, please subscribe to see more. I'm still going to be making videos about games, but I find I burn out when I do the same thing over and over again. So I've been trying to make other projects as well, just to keep my mind going. If you like this and want to see more, please let me know down in the comments. And I need to give a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters, especially my video producer tier and above patrons like See Thee Mess, iNight Gaming, Motzi, Nazar Salim, Pixelator Gadzi, and Warren Stephen Rose. I really appreciate you all and thank you so much for your support. Once again, these are really fun projects, especially if you have a bunch of old commons laying around from card games you've played in the past. Just take some hobby knife and a glue and a little bit of patience. But they're a lot of fun and you get a cool art piece out of it. Thanks for watching. I'll talk with you next time. Have a good one. Later.